The Q&A webinar for the New Innovator Award was held and recorded on June 13, 2025. The event was recorded and organized by Becky Miller. Visit commonfund.nih.gov/newinnovator or email newinnovatораwards@mail.nih.gov for more information. Images of NIH Director's New Innovator Award logo, Department of Health and Human Services logo, and National Institutes of Health Office of Strategic Coordination, the Common Fund logo.
I thank you everyone for joining us for the Q&A webinar for the NIH Director's New Innovator Award. This is for RFA-RM25-002. Just want to introduce ourselves. We are going to be your panelists today for this webinar. We have Dr. Patricia Lebowski, who is the program leader who oversees the High Risk, High Reward Research Program from the Office of the Director. And I'm Becky Miller, another program leader within the Office of the Director who oversees the Early Independence Award and helps with the rest of the program.
Types of Common Fund programs. Transformational Science and Discovery, or TSD. These programs are designed to establish new scientific principles models and research resources to transform scientific knowledge and paths to discovery. These programs include 4D nucleome, acute to chronic pain signatures, A2CPS, transformative high-resolution cryo-electron microscopy, cryo-EM, harnessing data science for health discovery and innovation in Africa, DSI Africa, human virome, high risk, high reward, HRHR, molecular transducers of physical activity in humans, MOTR PAC, advancing non-invasive optical imaging, NIOI, for biomedical systems, nutrition for precision health, NPH, oculomics, somatic mosaicism across human tissues, SMAHT, and stimulating peripheral activity to reduce conditions, SPARC. The Re-engineering the Research Enterprise, or RRE, programs are designed to transform how we do biomedical and behavioral research, how we make the biomedical workforces as robust as possible to ensure new perspectives and ideas contribute to discovery, how we transition that research into prevention and therapies, and how those successful prevention and therapies can be shared broadly. These programs include Care for Health, Complement Animal Research and Experimentation, Complement AIRE, Newborn Screening by Whole Genome Sequencing, NBXSWGS, Collaboratory, Replication to Enhance Research Initiative, Somatic Cell Genome Editing, SCGE, and Transformative Research to Address Health Disparities, THD. The third type of programs are Catalytic Data Resources, or CDR. These programs are designed to manage and develop data for scientific discoveries by accelerating research through data resources and include Bridge to Artificial Intelligence, Bridge to AI, Common Fund Data Ecosystem, CFDE, the Human Biomolecular Atlas Program, HUB MAP, Gabriella Miller Kids First Pediatric Research Program, Kids First, Precision Medicine with AI, Primed AI, and Systems Biology, SysBio, data platform.
So we are both from an office within the Office of the Director that manages the Common Fund. And the Common Fund is a really useful source for you to get to know. We create these programs that are meant to help spur areas of science that needs multiple institute and center support, that brings together cross disciplines, and we work in areas of any relevance to the NIH mission. So at any point of time, there may be programs that would be useful for you to look at. Maybe it's in your science area. There could be funding opportunities available, but there could be other resources that may be useful to you, including data sets, maybe models that you could use, different tools. So I encourage you to go to our website at commonfund.nih.gov and take a look at our existing programs and see if there are any that may be of use to you. So, there may be opportunities, access to even high-end instruments, reagents, all sorts of things. So take a look. But for today, we are here to talk about one program within the Common Fund specifically, and that's the High Risk, High Reward Research Program. So this program, it contains 4 initiatives, the NIH Director's Pioneer Award, New Innovator Award, Transformative Research Award, and Early Independence Award. And this program was created to help support scientists of various career stages who are proposing outstanding high-risk, high-impact research. We issue annual funding opportunities, and we welcome high-risk, high-impact ideas. So ideas that would not fare very well in a traditional NIH peer review. Importantly, we do not require preliminary data or detailed experimental plans for these initiatives, and we welcome any topic that is relevant to the NIH mission. And this includes social, behavioral, biomedical, applied, formal sciences. It could be basic, translational, or clinical research. All right, and we encourage applications from all eligible institutions. So any US-based domestic institution is welcome to apply.
HRHR Working Group. Chair, Nicole Kleinstreuer, OD. Program Leader, Patricia Lebowski, OD. Members, Geetha Bansal, FIC. Alexi Belkin, NIAMS. Sangeeta Bhagarva, NEI. David Bolweg, OD. Jean Carstia, CSR. Jennifer Collins, NIEHS. Christine Colvis, NCATS. Bill Duval, NINR. Emmeline Edwards, NCCIH. Zanip Irim, NIBIB. Marcus Ferroni, CSR. Asante Forde, OD. Nancy Freeman, NIDCD. April Harrison, NIDCR. Gabrielle Hidalgo, NIDCR. Dana Hill, CSR. Sharon Isern, CSR. Ray Jacobson, CSR. Sarah Linewand, NIMH. James Lee, CSR. Roger Little, NIDA. Brittany Mason-Ma, CSR. Becky Miller, OD. Brett Miller, NICHD. David Miller, NCI. Michael Morse, OD. Emo Okan, CSR. Vivian Ottawang, OD. Michael Pazin, NHGRI. Stephen Pittenger, NCATS. Dina Procassini, OD. Raul Rojas, CSR. Ananda Roy, OD. Diana Rootberg, NIDCR. John Satterley, NIDA. Dana Schlossler, OD. Kristen Schlotman, OD. Joanna Snyder, NIAD. Carol Schreffler, NIEHS. Corrine Silva, NIDDK. Elena Sminerva, CSR. Barbara Sorkin, OD. RV Srinivas, NIAAA. Nathaniel Stinson, NIMHD. William Tyler, NINDS. Scott Burbridge, NIDCR. Stephanie Webb, NHLBI. Jean Yi Wan, NIA. Ariel Zane, NIGMS.
And before we go any further, I want to thank our working group. We have many NIH staff from all the NIH institutes and centers who help us manage this program. And it takes a lot of work. So there are many hands. You can see all the different acronyms behind these names. We do have representatives from every NIH Institute and Center who administers grants. And we really rely heavily on their expertise in helping administer these awards and help us manage the program. So we like to thank them and acknowledge all of their work on this. All right, so now I'm going to turn this over to Trish, who will give you more details about the New Innovator Award.
Thanks, Becky. So we're going to talk today about this New Innovator Award and specifically this new funding opportunity that was just published. So the New Innovator Award was started back in 2007, and it is designed to support creative early career investigators that are proposing very innovative, high impact research projects. It's a single PI application only. It's a lot about you, the applicant. You have to have early investigator stage, ESI, early stage investigator status. What does that mean? You can't have received a large independent NIH grant yet with you as a PI. And it have to be within 10 years of either your terminal doctoral degree or clinical training. So we can talk more about that later, but that is the main criteria. You must be ESI. In the application, you're going to be required to commit 25% of your research effort to this award. So you have to have that effort to give. The awards are now $475,000 per year for 5 years. We also use a DP2 activity code, which is simply a mechanism, similar but very different from the R01. It's a DP2. So on the next slide, talk a little bit about the application process and what your application is going to look like. Really important there in red font, no matter what, look at the instructions in the SF424 guide. It's linked everywhere. You Google it, you'll find it. You got to follow those directions unless there's something different or contradictory in the RFA. Okay, so here's some differences with the DP2 that are written out here in this table. There's no specific aims page. So when you email me your specific aims page, I'm going to say that's fine, but you know there's no aims page in the application. And I've had that discussion with many. So no aims page. The research strategy is different. It's an essay, and we really mean that. You should think about it as an essay. It's only 10 pages only, right? This is the meat of your application. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more in detail about what should be in it. For the BioSketch, only yours, you, the PI, the applicant, only yours, nobody else's. You're not allowed to have a separate section for a bibliography or references. You're going to have to fit those into the essay, into that 10-page essay. No budget. Well, there's a short budget, but no detailed budget, no detailed equipment, no detailed letters of support. You do need things, if appropriate to your project, you need things like authentication, documentation. You need maybe vertebrate animals or human subjects or biohazards. So any of those sort of documents, again, you can find the instructions in the SF424 link. You need to include them. Your application will not be thrown out if you don't put them in, but and they're not review criteria, but it matters that you have them in there. You want to have it in there for the reviewers to access so they know you know what you're talking about. Okay, the next slide. Here's the budget information. We don't want a detailed budget. It's not required. It's not accepted. Okay, so don't use or submit a budget form. You might have to fill one out for your home institution, but you don't include it in the package that you submit to the NIH. So the total request will be for $2,375,000 in total funds. Now, on top of that, there will be F&A or indirect cost, and that's specific to different institutions, but the direct cost is that $2.375 million. The funds will be dispersed in annual increments, so 1 year at a time, of 475,000 per year for up to 5 years. You can take a no-cost extension at the end if you have not used all the funds. So let's talk about the essay a little bit. Remember, it's an essay that you're telling a story, and you want it to be a compelling story for those reviewers. But you need to include a few subheadings that we put in there, because all the essays will look a little bit similar to the reviewers. You're going to have the project science areas. Those are spelled out in the RFA. I'm not going to go through them now, but it's a couple digits there. It's an abbreviation for primary and secondary areas of science. It's going to be hard to be very precise. There's only 9 of these areas, but you have to pick 1 or 2. I'll talk about what they're used for later. Then you're going to describe your project. You're going to tell the reviewers, tell us why it's really important. Tell us overall how you're going to get there. Remember, you don't need any preliminary data, but if you have it, you can include it. You know that if you include it, it's going to be evaluated, though. It's usually a good idea to put right in there in writing that in order to comply with this funding opportunity, a detailed and extensive experimental plan is not provided. However, the reviewers really need to know that you know what you're talking about, that you have a plan, that you have really thought through this plan, and you're going to pursue it in a way that's going to be robust and scientifically rigorous. So your essay is going to need to have enough details to convince them of that. So it's called the New Innovator, so you need to spell out why it's innovative. Argue, tell the reviewers why this proposal is exceptionally innovative. Everything the NIH funds has to be innovative. We want this to be your sort of wild and crazy idea, really outside the box. That's what we're interested in finding. Investigator qualifications. You want to talk about why you? What have you done previously that's been innovative or creative? What's your drive for doing this? What's your attack plan? Whatever. Explain why you are the right person to carry this out. Then, why is this suitable for New Innovator? Why is it high risk, high reward? Acknowledge the risk. You need to state that you know where the risk is. And then you, of course, have a plan to mitigate that risk. But if it's viewed as non-risky or high risk, low reward, that would not do you well in reviews. So spell it out for the reviewers. Why is this high risk, high reward? Somewhere in there, you need to state that you will commit 25% of your research effort, not your whole effort, your research effort toward the project. And then finally, any bibliography, any citations that you would have, you need to fit in this 10 pages. So you can abbreviate them. I wouldn't put it in a size 2 font. That's not a good idea. But have it legible, but you can abbreviate things to PubMed IDs or whatever you feel you need to do. But it must fit in that essay space. So we're going to talk about the review process in a minute. It's a little different, but one of the things you want to make sure you're thinking about is who your audience is, who you're writing this for. So it has to be written for people that might be well outside your scientific field. So if you're a cell biologist, you want a geneticist to be able to read and appreciate this. And I'm just throwing two ideas out there, but they will be, if you make it to the discussion round, those reviewers will be perhaps well outside your field. So they have to understand it. Why is this new and different and innovative? And what's the potential here for really important and broad, strong impact if your project is successful? One way to think about this, and it's totally up to you, but one way to design this is to start with describing the landscape of the field, maybe discuss current state of the art, current challenges, current gaps in the state of the art or in the field, and give the reviewers the context for why your proposal is important, why it's going to make a big difference, and why it's innovative, why it's not already being done, perhaps. What you really want is for the reviewer to sit back and say, wow, that's cool. I wish I'd thought of that. So that's what you're going for. Don't use a lot of jargon. Ease the reader, the reviewer, into the jargon of the field. Of course, you're going to use some acronyms. We all do, but be careful that you don't end up in alphabet soup, that it was written solely for the experts in your field. Now, we told you don't need any preliminary data and you don't need that detailed experimental plan. But again, the reviewer needs to know that you thought about it. So you tell them what's risky, how you're going to get around that. You will really want to make sure that you have alternatives in there. I'm going to do plan A here. If plan A doesn't work, we're going to do this instead. If that doesn't work, this is the way we'll do it, so that they know you've thought about it really deeply. And then finally, make sure that the reviewer appreciates that you're going to do this in a robust and rigorous manner. You're going to validate your brand new technology if that's what you're doing. You're going to have estimates, which maybe reference a power analysis of numbers of animals or humans, if you're going to use either. If you're doing that, you need to include sex as a biological variable, if that's appropriate for the work you're proposing.
For FAQs, visit commonfund.nih.gov/new-innovator/FAQ. For detailed application and award guidance, visit commonfund.nih.gov/new-innovator-awards/guidance. And for sample applications, visit commonfund.nih.gov/new-innovator-awards/sample.
So we have a very detailed FAQ page, and the link is there. We've also got an application and award guidance, so we go through probably more detail than you want. And then we also have sample applications. These are a little different. They're under old policies that are not in place at the moment. So note that some of the things will be different, but the essays is probably what you maybe want to look at to see how those successful applications manage to convey their impact and their innovation to the reviewers. Okay, let's talk. We've been talking about reviewers and who are they? Let's tell you about the process of how this works. So, as you know from looking at the new funding opportunity, the due date is August 19th of this year. So, not too long from now, right? So, by that date, and that means 5 p.m., your time, wherever you are, they must be received at NIH. Now, if you've never submitted before, don't wait until 4:30 p.m. to do it, because, hit the button and then walk away, and then there comes an error code, and you got to resolve that before 5 p.m. So I always tell people a day early, at least, maybe 2 days early, whatever, but don't wait to the last minute. Make sure you have everything in place to get it done. You will have help, I assume, at your institution, but make sure you're ready to go before August 19th. So this huge pile of applications is received, and we're not allowed to tell you how many we get. And then they go through the scientific review process at the Center for Scientific Review. So Becky and I have nothing to do with this review. We know about it, but we don't handle it. The first level of review, we have what we call mail-in reviewers. They're phase 1 reviewers. They're scientific area experts. However, I would not call them subject matter experts. They're more like subject matter adjacent experts, right? There's only 9 categories, and you know that. That's what those categories are used for, is this first step to identify these reviewers and to match applications to mail-in reviewers. So those 3 individuals will be on each application, and my understanding is that each reviewer gets a few. They try to get between 5 and 10, so they're not reviewing these as one-offs. But they sit down at their individual computers and read and then provide preliminary scores and comments on your proposal. They do not talk to each other. They don't align their points of view. They might have very different points of view and very different scores. But those come together at the end of phase 1, and then the Center for Scientific Review, there's a scientific review officer that's assigned to this program. There's a few of them, and they work together. They're wonderful. They work together with the editorial panel. They use the comments and the scores from the phase 1 reviewers, and they established a line where they discuss approximately 20%, and that depends on how many applications are received in the first place. I say approximately 20, it's gone over that, it's also gone under that, so somewhere in there. So it's a hard bar to even get into the discussion pool, and that's something to remember if you are not discussed in previous years. It's hard. So those editorial panel members are each assigned a few, I don't know how many. They review them, they discuss them, and they give final scores. You'll get your score a couple days after the meeting, and we don't have a date for the meeting yet. I don't know when it'll be sometime maybe in March or April of next year. So after that, then we go through what's called a second level of review, where our council, which is the DePoughkeepsie Council of Councils. It's a group of they're very established, very senior scientists. They effectively review the review process. They don't go through individual applications and provide funding recommendations. They look through what happened with the review and make sure it's fair. So that must happen before awards can be made, and that usually happens near the end of May, in this case, 2026. So in that phase 1, the first part, your application comes in and it's going to be assigned to one of 2 equivalent panels. By equivalent, I mean scientifically equivalent. They're randomly placed in these 2 panels in a review branch in the Center for Scientific Review. Do not panic if you see that it is a branch that's focused on immunology and you're not doing immunology and you get really worried. Don't worry about it. It's just the branch where the scientific review officer is located. All of the applications are reviewed together, which is part of the reason that you're writing for a more broad audience, right? So don't worry about that if that happens. The Center for Scientific Review staff goes through an administrative review to check and make sure that the application is complete and that you, the PI, you have ESI status so that you're eligible to apply. Go in early into your ERA Commons account. Make sure the data in there are accurate and make sure that if you're ESI, it says you're ESI and that they have the correct date of when you graduated or completed your clinical training. So the applications will be grouped based on those areas of science that you identify in your application. That's the code that you put in the top. And then they'll also look at them for potential conflicts of interest. If you're at University of X, nobody from University of X is allowed to review your application, okay? If you have a collaboration with someone, they don't want that person reviewing your application. So those conflicts of interest, they go through them and point them out and make sure that the male reviewers, MAIL, those scientific area experts that they're going to recruit, that they don't have any conflicts. So then they recruit those reviewers and assign them to the applications in phase 1. So this is phase 1, again, blown out a little bit better. The reviewers are recruited. matched to the application. So remember, you have 3 people reading your application. Scientific areas matched as well as possible. They evaluate, they write their critiques based on those 3 evaluation criteria on the screen. And this is spelled out in the funding opportunity. First one is whether or not the area is important. So the importance of your scientific problem and the potential impact. And that means the potential impact of your project, not of the problem. It's both. And then novelty or innovation of the approach and how you're going to tackle the problem that you are faced with. And then creative potential of the PI. Remember, this is a lot about you as the applicant. And again, those reviewers write up their critiques, and they have a paragraph about impact, and they score. So on the next phase, then, those applications that are selected for phase 2 and move forward are based on that score that the phase 1 reviewers gave each application. Now, you don't get to see that score, and I don't get to see that score. Whether you're discussed or not, those numbers go away. But those numbers are used by the editorial panel to choose the top approximately 20% that are then advancing to the discussion phase or phase 2. So what's phase 2 like? The editorial panel, it's a small panel, 15, 20 people, very senior scientists usually. They are chosen specifically for their broad understanding of the scientific domain. And they'll be able to review outside their specific expertise. So and these names are listed on our website from previous years. It'll always change somewhat, but the names are there so you can get an idea if you want to look and see who are the typical idea of reviewers. So each finalist application gets assigned to 3 reviewers. They can look at the critiques that those scientific experts, subject matter experts in phase 1 wrote. They can look at them and they lean into them, especially if it's not something that they're highly familiar with. So all the finalists are discussed and scored, and they're scored based on those 3 review criteria we talked through before. So after the review, what happens? You're going to get a score. Few days after the review, it comes up in your ERA Commons account, and you'll get an automated email that your score is there. If you're discussed, you're going to get a final score. And these scores range from 10 all the way up to, well, they have the range all the way up to 90. So if you're discussed, you'll see that final score. If you're not discussed, you don't get a score. It will say not discussed. Okay. And then about a month later, sometimes a little longer because these are so complicated and there's so many of them, you will get what's called a summary statement. So if you've been discussed and you have a score, you get a little paragraph that is a resume or a summary of the discussion, and then you get the critiques, the more detailed critiques. If you're not discussed, you simply receive the critiques. Again, if you're not discussed, you don't get any scores. But if you are discussed, you get that score that's important. Okay. And then the advisory council, that council of councils for the office of directors, will perform that second level of review. And what they do is simply look at the first level of review to make sure it's fair and it's uniform, and that the review criteria were appropriately applied. They don't re-review the science in the application, but we need their concurrence with the review in order to make awards. Okay, so now we're going to take some of your questions. And these are questions that folks have emailed in. Some of them from this year, some of them from years past, because we know what the questions are that come up all the time. So, Becky, shall we
Yes.
So
All
we do
right.
this?
Yes. So we've broken up these questions into very broad categories, and we're going to begin with questions regarding eligibility. So, is it required to have a tenure track faculty position? Do you know if this has ever been awarded to someone in a non-tenure track research position?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one we get every year. You do not need to be tenure track. And yes, we have made awards to people that are not tenure track. In fact, there are many institutions out there that don't have a tenure track, right? So, of course, they're eligible. So, the key is that you are an independent research scientist. You have your own independent position. You're not in a mentored position. So, that's really the key difference.
All right. Can I extend my early stage investigator status? And if so, who do I contact to do it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes, you can extend your ESI or early stage investigator status. There's an email box that you can email to. I don't think there's a phone number. And if you Google it, you'll find it. And you simply ask them, you tell them the situation, and they will have you justify why you need an extension. You can't get an extension just because you don't have a grant yet. There has to be a reason for the extension, but there are lots of reasons that people might need an extension. So work with your university. Often the same reasons that they might extend tenure decisions would be used to extend ESI status. But if you go to that website, there's a lot of reasons for extensions and the email of who to contact. Everything I've heard is that they're very fair and they're very fast. Now, I wouldn't do this on August 18th, the day before the applications are due. So log in early, make sure you have the status, and then if you need to extend, extend. Don't email Becky and I. We can't do anything. You go to that website and talk to them, okay?
All right. So do I need to have ESI status only at the time of application? What about for the award start date?
Yeah, that's a good question too. You absolutely need it when you apply. You must be within that 10-year window and you must not have received a large independent research grant. So if you don't make that status when you apply, don't bother to apply, or they won't accept it. They'll send it back to you. However, with the award start date, which is usually September, and for this instance, it's September 2026. If your 10-year clock runs out before September 26, that's okay. However, if you receive another grant, like an R01 or U01, there's a whole list of grants you can receive. But if the grant you receive is not in there, then you have lost your ESI status, and I will not be able to make a DP2 award to you. So you need to be really careful about that. And, because you should always be considering multiple applications, when you're doing that, make sure you take note of when the award start date might be and either strategize that way or, talk to me if you get a amazing score and you have a 10 and you have another one pending. I'm not going to be able to make that award if you accept an R01 before we can make our award. So yeah, that's important.
Right. Are non-US citizens eligible to apply?
Yeah, you don't need citizenship status to apply, but your institution must be a US institution.
All right. Do I have to have a PhD to apply, or can I apply with a Master's of Science?
It's fine with us if whatever degree you have. However, your institution submits the grant for you. So if you don't have an independent research position that they will be willing to submit the grant for you, then you won't be able to apply. Because remember, if you get this grant, it's actually not your grant. It belongs to your institution. So you should talk to the folks in your grants office or your chair or whoever, wherever you are, talk to them and make sure that they will support your application.
Similar line, are postdocs eligible to apply?
So yes, if again, your institution will let you apply, because there are postdocs that can apply for R01s. Usually, often they have a different, it's all dependent on your institution. So again, same answer, go talk to your grants office, or people in your department to find out if they will support you to apply.
Does the new Innovator Award remove my early stage investigator status if I get it?
Oh yeah. Yes, indeed it does. You get that notice of award and you are no longer an ESI, and congratulations.
Am I still eligible if I have ESI status but have an R01 application pending?
Sure, as long as it's pending, that's fine. Your ESI status would not change until your institution receives a notice of award. Once that happens, your ESI status is gone, and again, congratulations. But you can't apply. Yeah.
If the grant is awarded, do my co-investigators or collaborators lose their ESI status?
That's a good question. So remember, this is a single investigator award or application. So you don't have co-investigators on the award. You could have collaborators though. Because they're just collaborators, it doesn't matter what their ESI status is. And if you get the award, it doesn't change their ESI status.
Can I submit a new application with revised or updated materials from my last DP2 submission? Like how many times can I
Absolutely.
apply? Yeah.
Yes, you can apply as many times as you want, hopefully until you get one. But yes, you can apply as long as you are still ESI.
All right. Let's see. How important is it to have a track record that covers the entire scope of the proposed project to be competitive? And can collaborators be used to fill any gaps?
That's a very good question. I mean, yes and no, right? So remember, this award is a lot about you, the applicant. So if you're proposing something that you have zero experience in, reviewers aren't going to look kindly at that, even if you say you have a collaborator that can do the technology or whatever. However, if it's a smaller part of the project, I'm sure that would be fine. You have to convince those reviewers that this is your project, that you are the one who's come up with the idea, that is running the idea. And then if you need a collaborator to do something relatively small that's not the major concept, that should be fine. Again, it's up to the reviewers. We can say it's fine, but they might have their own opinions.
All right. Can I submit a DP2 and an R01 at the same time?
Oh, sure. You can submit 3 R01s and a DP2 at the same time, but I wouldn't recommend it. No, yes, of course you can submit them at the same time. They can be pending at the same time. The key is that they cannot have scientific overlap. Okay, it's not the same project. It can be the same time frame. It can involve, maybe the same model system or maybe some of the same questions, but it cannot be the same project. And that's the case for anything, whether it's an R01 or an R35 or an R21, it cannot overlap. So if you go on the NIH website, you can get a more coherent definition of what overlap is. I can tell you that the Division of Receipt and Referral and the Center for Scientific Review will look at applications closely when they come in. And if there is overlap of text or figures, they send it to the program officer, to myself and to whoever the other program officer is. And we look and we determine whether or not they're scientifically overlapping. So you want to be careful with that and make sure that they're discrete projects.
I'm going to extend that question. So you
Go ahead.
talked about the R35s. So maybe could you talk more about the MIRAs? Because they say in their funding opportunity that they allow overlap.
They do, you're right. They say that they allow overlap with an NIGMS R01, not with a DP2. Okay, we use the standard NIH policy. We don't use a special policy. So that is a within NIGMS policy, and they're perfectly fine to do that, but not with a DP2.
All right. I have heard that clinical research and non-basic science research is rarely funded because it isn't, quote, discovery related. Could you speak to this?
Well, we've taken a look at our portfolio, and frankly, we support clinical science in the same ratio where it is part of the applicant pool, if that makes sense. So it is the case that we don't get a lot of clinical science. We don't get a lot of behavioral research. We get a lot of discovery-based basic science. But let me tell you that if you do well and you get a score, that could help you, because one of the things we do with scored applications is we look to make sure that our portfolio is balanced. So please, yes, submit it. It might be good that your project is a little different from the usual project that we get.
All right. Are applicants from smaller teaching-oriented institutions at a significant funding disadvantage? Larger research-intensive institutions seem to have a higher rate of funding.
Yeah, well, again, that's because they apply more, right? We've looked at this, and the more applications from an institution, the more likely they are to get awards. So, the only reason that you might be at a disadvantage is if you don't have the support to do the research. As long as you can do the research where you are or with collaborations nearby or wherever, then it should be fine. And we, again, encourage you to apply. We also look at our portfolio and try to make sure that we spread geographically across the country, as well as in different institutions across the country. So it could actually help you if you can get into the discussion pool and get a score.
All right. Does the 25% research effort mean 3 calendar months, or is 25%, or is it 25% of my contract? Say my contract says 30% research efforts needed, then should I calculate calendar months based on that 30%?
Yeah, so so it is your research effort. So yes, if you only have 30% research time, it's 25% of that 30%, right? So it's probably 7.5% if I did that real quick. Now, that said, reviewers might question how much time is that and how much effort can you give to it? And they would want to know that the effort that you put in is appropriate for the science that's to be done in the 5 years of the project.
Can I commit more than 25% research effort to the project? Is there a max?
No, the maximum is how much effort you have, right? You cannot commit 110%. You should work with your institution to make sure that what you're committing is reasonable.
Do I have to have a change in research direction for the new innovator?
No. One of our other programs, the Pioneer, you've probably heard of, and it requires a change in research direction. This does not. However, I will tell you that sometimes I see reviews where they say, this appears to be a logical, iterative extension of the PI's previous work. And what that means is that they don't see an innovative leap forward. So it can be the same direction, but if they think it's the next obvious logical thing, that of course you would do that, then it won't review as well. So you have to make clear where the innovation is.
Can the DP2 time be subsumed as part of K23 activities, I guess, or other career awards?
you answer that one, Becky. I have to drink water.
Um, it depends on the mechanism. You would need to talk to your program officer for your career award to see if it can happen.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yes.
All right. What if I'm not able to locate a university or institution?
Well, that's a problem. Your institution has to submit for you. The NIH does not fund individual people. Um, we fund institutions, either schools, universities, research institutions, small businesses sometimes. So you need to be a part of one of those groups in order to apply. You can't run this out of your garage, if that's what you meant, Becky.
It's a fancy garage, but no.
No, you can't.
What is the difference on scope of science between the NIH, or I guess probably the NIH Director's New Innovator DP2 and the NIAID DP2?
Yeah, that's a good question. NIAID has a little different criteria. You need to be in your first year of your faculty position. So that's one of the things that's quite different. The other thing, of course, is that for the NIAID DP2, you must be doing science in the mission space of NIAID. So the NIH Directors Award takes science from anywhere. So you could be in the NIAID mission space and apply to the Director's Award, but not the other way around.
Okay. See this one's kind of tricky. So for eligibility, are you still eligible if you've been switched to a co-PI on an R01 after the review was conducted? For instance, if the original co-PI retired and you replaced them. So the NIH doesn't use the term co-PI. We use
Yeah,
the
that
term
does make sense.
multi-PI. So I'm assuming that they're asking like they weren't a PI on the original application, but then were put in to replace somebody who left. Does that impact their eligibility, their ESI status?
So if you were not one of the investigators, one of the co-Is, we don't, again, as Becky said, we don't use the word co-PI, although it might slip out of our mouths once in a while, but co-investigators, right? So a PI on that grant. So if you were not on that grant when it was originally reviewed and funded, and then they slot you in there maybe at year 3 or something like that, maybe is that what they mean, do you think? That's fine because you were not a PI, one of the co-Is on the grant when it was reviewed. So, yeah. But if you are on, let's say, oh, I don't know, the resubmission of that, it was funded for 5 years and now they've slotted you into it and it's about to be competitively reviewed, then you're one of the real PIs. And that, if you get that, that will take away your ESI status.
All right. If my proposed project has been partially funded or is midway in its development, can I apply for the DP2?
Partially funded. Well, if you already have funding for it, you can't write a grant on it. Am I understanding that right, Becky?
Yes.
Yeah,
And there's
yeah.
a second question that kind of is a similar thing. If part of the research was submitted as a foundation award, can I put the same idea in a DP2 application?
Yeah, no, you can't. Not if it's funded by a foundation. What you can do is in the just-in-time process, you could decide to turn down that foundation funding. But we don't usually have people negotiate away aims or part of the DP2s. So it's the whole package together. Yeah.
Yep. All right. How do awards from non-NIH agencies or programs affect ESI status? For instance, NSF or DOE grants.
I see. So non-NIH federal grants. That doesn't count toward your ESI status. We're really focused only on other NIH awards that you would have.
All right. And do collaborators also need to have ESI status?
No. Anybody can be a collaborator. It's not like what you're probably thinking of is a multi-PI R01 only gets ESI status if all the PIs, all the co-Is are ESI. So they put one ESI in there and then they have a bunch of established people, is not able to then be characterized as an ESI R01. That doesn't fly. But here, the only person we really care about with respect to ESI status is the PI.
Okay. All right, that was the eligibility. So we're going to actually move on now to application and submission questions. All right, you said do not submit a specific games page, but if I provide one, will it hurt my application?
Well, it won't be part of the application. It would be rejected. It would not be bundled into the PDF that goes out to the reviewers. So don't do it. It actually, if they put in extra pages, it could be rejected too. So yes, in that case, it would hurt your application. I'm not sure which they would do, either edit it out or kick out the whole application. So I would say don't do it.
Better to follow the instructions that you're given.
Please, yes, follow the instructions, yes.
All right. Can the font size for the citations in my essay be a smaller font than the rest of the text?
Yeah, sure, a little bit. But again, don't get crazy. Don't move it down to the point where it can't be read. Yeah, a couple font size smaller is fine. Or, they have narrow fonts too that you could try to use, but it must be legible. If it's not legible, it will get kicked out. So don't do that to yourself.
All right. Can you elaborate more on high risk, high reward compared to a normal R01 application?
Right. Well, it's going to be up to you as the applicant to describe the risk and to tell us and the reviewers what the risk is and how high it is. In general, what we see for an R01 is we want low risk or maybe not zero risk, right? But low risk, high reward, or maybe medium reward. Nobody wants low risk, low reward. But I think you have to define it. You have to tell us what's risky about this. And the reviewers have to believe you. They may not believe you. And if you think something is simple, but the rest of the scientific world does not, that's going to be a problem. So you just want to lay it out there. This assay is high risk. We're going to try to develop it or the technology or whatever. Or maybe the risk is that the whole thing won't work. You're going to ask a question and maybe you're not going to get an answer. The key is that you tell the reviewers what you're going to do to mitigate the risk. If this part doesn't work and you end up doing it differently, what do you lose from that? Or maybe what do you gain? Your question might not be answered in total, but you might find yourself answering a little different question. But the key thing is that you convince the reviewers that the risk is worth the reward and that you have a plan to mitigate that risk.
All right. Can you provide example applications to look at?
Sure, we have a bunch of them on our website. You go to Common Fund New Innovator, the link that's down there on the slide, you go to that and you can navigate to the sample applications. I want to remind you that they were sent in obviously in previous years, so some of the policies will be different. The budget pages will be different. The face page will be a little different. So don't model those parts after the samples, but you can look at the essays and it gives you an idea for how successful applications package their questions and their experiments. These are all successful applications. We don't have samples of non-successful applications. And by the way, these are not de-identified. Those individuals have very generously allowed them to be posted. So thank them.
Right. Is a DP2 more competitive than an R01?
I think in general, yes. The answer to that is yes. Our DP2s, the success rate varies per year and it varies depending on our budget, but also on the number of applications we receive. But in general, yes, they're a little more competitive than an R01.
Is there information about successful DP2 applications and their corresponding science area designations? So
I don't
think it's
think so.
I don't
Yeah.
think so. Yeah, I don't have that available.
We haven't divided it up that way. You can always go into NIH Reporter and you can pull and look at, to your heart's content, all the other DP2 successful awards, not applications, but awards, and see what we funded in the past. It's all there. It's public. It's taxpayer dollars. It's all publicly, transparent.
And we do the scientific review officers do look at the different science areas to make sure that, the percentage of applications that we receive, like to see how they're like making it as finalists. So we do monitor that, and we have not seen any biases, though.
That's a good point. But importantly, we do not use those scientific areas to decide upon the award recipients, right? So we don't say, oh, we have too many, I'm making this up, too many neuro awards this year, so let's not make as many. We don't say, nope, we've got too many omics or too many CRISPR or too many whatever, and we don't have, anything else. So we do not use those categories to make funding decisions.
Yep, just the SROs.
Yep.
All right. Are letters of support allowed?
Nope, no letters. No letters allowed.
Okay, then how do we mention collaborations?
Yeah, that's a good question. You need to write about the collaboration and the collaborator in your essay. So, and within that 10 pages, the information has to fit. So you can state who they are. You can't give a bio sketch, but you can say they're an expert in whatever they're an expert in, and they will be helping with this aspect of the project. This, I don't know, maybe they'll be supplying reagents, maybe technology, whatever. You can talk about them that way. But you cannot supply a bio sketch. They cannot supply a letter of support.
All right. How much detail is expected in the research plan and how should it be presented?
Yeah, so we tell all of you, it's in the funding opportunity that you do not need a detailed experimental plan. So what does that mean exactly? What's a detail, right? That's really up to you to decide. I will tell you that reviewers often want a little more detail, but if you give too much detail, they will tell you this is too detailed. I don't get the concepts here. So you really need to be careful about if you make it look like a classic R01, and you probably have examples of those from your colleagues and mentors. One of the worst reviews, one of the hardest reviews to deal with is, this is great science, but it should be an R01. Look at all the detail they gave me and look at all the, there's the innovation is pretty standard and it looks like an R01. They will tell you this should be an R01. You don't want that review because then it's not going to be a DP2. And that's important if you're thinking about submitting a DP2 when you submitted last year and you're thinking about doing it again and you're going to add a ton more detail. Be careful because you might go from a 37, I'm making up a number, to not discussed because they will tell you this looks like an R01. So be careful with that. I think they need enough detail that they know you've thought about it and that you have a plan and you've thought deeply about it and you have alternatives. Don't leave out alternatives. Um, yeah.
All right, how large should the project be that is being proposed, and is there a penalty for being overly ambitious?
Mm, it's a good question. I mean, it's hard to measure how large something is, right? You have to be able to complete it in 5 years for the amount of money in the budget, right? If you say you're going to do a clinical trial with 4,000 participants and you're going to reimburse them each $10,000 each, that's a little ridiculous, but it will be obvious to a reviewer that you don't know what you're talking about. So I think one of the ways you can counter this is to be really careful about a timeline for what you think you can get done in this amount of time with this much support. You don't have to put the timeline in the award or the application, but it's something to think about that you're being realistic, that you know that things don't always work perfectly the first time. And that things, because it's high risk, things might not work. And you might have to come up with or go to your plan B that you've carefully spelled out in the application. So if you're very overambitious, I have seen reviewers say that this PI doesn't know what they're talking about. They can't possibly get all this done. And that could hurt you. So be realistic. You don't want to be under ambitious. I've also seen that be bad too. So you need to hit that sweet spot of what's possible and what makes sense.
All right, is it better to include preliminary data in the application, or is the presence of preliminary data counted against the innovativeness of the proposal?
Yeah, it's a good question too. They're all good questions. So any preliminary data you put in can be judged. All right. So if you say you're going to develop this high risk, I don't know, assay or this high risk technology, and then you put in preliminary data that you're 3/4 of the way there, they'll say this person doesn't need this grant. So I guess that could be a penalty, but in reality, what I would tell you is take it to the next step. If you've already got it 3/4 made, you can include that as part of the grant, but then what's the really innovative question you're going to ask with that technology, right? So it's not like an R01 that you need to have every single feasibility issue addressed. That's at least that's the urban legend, right? That's what you need for an R01. This the reviewers should be a little bit more lenient to say, well, they don't show these data, but I think they're going to get there, or, this isn't that hard to do. But if it's something that you think a reviewer might think is impossible and you have data to support that you're partway there, then it might be worth putting in. It's really up to you. You don't want to take away from the innovation. And if that part is the only innovation, you might end up hurting yourself. I don't know. I talked around that, Becky. Do you want to add to that?
No, I think that's got it. Kind of similar line of questioning is, we're not supposed to include a detailed experimental plan, but if we're including human subjects, the human
Yeah.
subject section will end up requiring essentially a detailed experimental plan. Is this correct?
That is correct. Yes, that's a special example. And yes, you absolutely need a detailed human subjects section if you're doing that. Same thing with vertebrate animals. However, don't use the vertebrate animal section or whatever to sneak in details that are important for review. Okay. Those sections are not supposed to be score driving. They have to be there and they have to be complete. But the reviewers will not they don't have to be looking at that section in order to understand what the experiments are that you're going to do. So they could just review your essay and score it and then go to the human subjects and say, okay, yes, that's all intact and they've covered those details and that's fine. But they shouldn't need the information in there to go back and score your essay because that's not going to work out well for you.
Right. Do I need to include collaborators for my application to be successful?
Oh, no, definitely not. Nope.
All right. Could you talk about the difference between the BioSketch personal statement versus the essay investigator qualification section?
Hmm. Well, the BioSketch personal statement should be just that. It should be a personal statement, but it can be much more encompassing than what you're going to write about in the essay. It could be part of, other projects that you might have going on in the lab. It could cover other things. The essay should really focus, that part of the essay should focus on what you, the PI, bring to the project within the DP2. Okay, so I would say that the BioSketch personal statement could be a little broader, and you want that part of the essay to be focused on what you've done in the past, your creativity, your evidence of innovation, but with an idea of toward the goal of the project you're writing about.
And how much does the BioSketch contribute to the success of the application?
Well, I think it's important. I mean, remember, this is a lot about you as the PI. And in your BioSketch, everybody looks at that. I mean, that's really important. It has your history. It has, examples of publications, and you can effectively annotate those publications and tell the reviewers how they're important. So you might talk about things in the BioSketch that you don't have space for in the essay that might be peripheral subject matter wise to the essay. But I think it's very important part of the application for the reviewers to get a sense of who you are.
All right. And this is a personal preference for you. Do you want applicants to reach out to you as the program officer to discuss their application prior to submitting it?
Um, I'm happy to meet with people. I'll give you a link and you can click it and find an appointment time. I'm happy to meet with you. I can't review your application for you. I'm not going to edit anything. I will talk to you about, generally, where's the innovation? What's new and different here? Talk to me about the risk, right? But I'm not going to go through the specifics of an experiment and help you troubleshoot and talk about whether or not that's a better experiment or not. I can also, of course, talk to you about the application and how you put it together and any of the forms that you need. Or if I can't answer the question, I'll find the person that can. So, but yeah, you can reach out to me and can set up a meeting.
All right. We are going to now move on to questions about budget. So, can collaborators from outside the United States be compensated on the DP2?
So there are a lot of new policies right now about foreign subcontracts, which is basically what you're asking about. So at this point in time, I think that those that we're a little fluid on that right now, and it could change. It could even change by August, by the time that your application is due. So what I would ask is that you see if that's absolutely necessary. And if so, we can work and see if that needs to happen. But it might be an issue depending on where policies are at that point. So I don't know right now.
Yeah, so the issues with subawards, but if you have collaborators who, um, are just providing maybe advice
Oh,
or kind
sure.
of that can happen. It's for the
Yes.
subawards. But the
It,
subawards does not include if they are just foreign vendors. So it's a, a
yes.
a shop that's just in a foreign country that's excluded um, from the policy, as well as like consulting firms in a foreign
Yes.
country.
Yep. Right. Yeah. Well, the compensation is part of the sticky wicket there. But if it is a intellectual collaborator, totally fine. Don't worry about it. Yes, that's fine. But it's when money is to be moved, that's when it gets policy written. So we'll have to work on that.
All right. Yeah, it's similar question. Like, can the budget include the cost of collecting data abroad and samples? So that will probably talk to us if you have any of those issues.
Yep.
All right.
You can Google on the NIH website, you can look for notices where foreign subcontracts are defined, and those policies again might be changing. So, yeah.
If I don't submit a budget, can I still purchase equipment?
It depends. It depends on how expensive the equipment is. So you should talk to me about that. Again, these are policies that might change, but if it turns out to be something that is really needed for you to do the project, of course, we'll try to support it. But you would work with either myself or the program officer when you're, I don't know, it says during the award, you said something about during the award period. So after the award is started. So we'll have to work on that with the program officer in the institute or center that's administering the award. Usually it's fine. We're happy to be flexible. We want to make sure that you have what you need to get the work done. But talking to us is the best way to approach that.
All right. Can I pay for collaborators and co-investigators who work with me on the project?
So you can't have a co-investigator, right? That's how NIH defines a PI. So, but you can have collaborators, and yes, you can pay them, compensate them for time or reagents or whatever it is that you need. But it won't be there won't be a co-investigator.
Do I need an exact budget for any consortium costs?
Not at the time of application. So remember, we don't ask for, and we won't accept a detailed budget for that.
All right. Are no cost extensions allowed for unexpended funds?
Yes, yes, they are. You have to request them. Yeah, again, working with your program officer. But yes, they're allowed.
And is the new Innovator Award renewable?
Oh, no, it's not. And of course, you can't apply for a second one if you get the first one because your ESI status is gone. It's not renewable. I can tell you that we have other high risk, high reward endeavors that you can look into if you get to that place in your career. But the other thing is that we would hope that you would turn this into, at some level, R01 science. If you're an award recipient, we'll work with you during the time of your award. We have grant writing workshops and things like that. We'll try to help you take the next step and transition that project into something that would be suitable for an R01.
All right. And can the award be transferred to a new institution? And if so, is it common for investigators to change institutions during the award period?
I don't know what common means. It's not the majority for sure, but it's not uncommon. It always happens. Maybe one or two people a year might move to a different university or research institution. So can you move the grant? Yes, if the original institution, remember the award is to your institution, not to you. So that original institution has to agree to relinquish it. That's one part. And the other part, and they usually do, because remember, a DP2 is a person-centric award. So if you leave, they're not going to be able to keep the award going because you, as the PI, are a huge part of that. So, what was the other part of that? Okay, so they have to relinquish, but also you have to be going to a place where you can continue the research. So if you're going somewhere where you can't get the research done that you were planning to do in the project, then that probably won't work out. And this will be the program officer that's helping with administration of the award, you'll talk to them about it. It's something called a Type 7 award. You'll have to submit paperwork, but given if your original institution relinquishes and the new institution has the appropriate facilities, equipment, etc., it should be fine.
All right. How many awards will be given this year?
30. We promise we have funds for 30 awards for the RM 25-002. Sometimes there are more than that, but there will be at least 30.
All right. And what proportion of applications are ultimately funded? So success rate.
So the success rate, right? It depends. I can't answer that until we know how many applications we get. The success rate for this initiative has varied. Lately, it's been around or maybe slightly less than 10%. If we get a ton of applications, the success rate will be less because we know how many awards we can make, right? So it depends a lot.
All right. We're going to move on to the last section, which is about review. All right, an easy one for you right off the bat. Can you define innovation from the reviewer's perspective?
Absolutely not. Well, innovation, it's one of those things, it's like you know it when you see it, which is really an unsatisfying answer. So no, I cannot. I think that you have to define it for the reviewer. You have to tell them in your application what's new, what's different, why is this not the obvious thing that one would do? Yeah, sorry.
All right. Are non-finalists notified of their elimination from consideration and when?
So that is up to the staff at the Center for Scientific Review. In the past, yes, the SRO has notified applicants if they are not going to be discussed, have notified them before the review meeting. In theory, that lets you think about if you want to repackage the project for an R01 coming up soon. It lets you think about basically plan for your next steps. We know that this review process is long. It's long and arduous. It takes a full year from application to award almost. So if we can give you a few months back, so at least you could think about what you want to do next, that's the reason for that. Yeah.
All right. What are the reviewers looking for in investigator qualifications? For instance, publications, prior funding?
Yes. I mean, anything that you have that shows that you've been successful so far in your career to date will be a positive. That might be in the area of publications. It might be in the area of collaborations. Fellowship funding, sure. Foundation funding, maybe. Yeah. Anything that you have that indicates success, I think are things that you should add in there. Yes.
All right. Is it allowed to send updates such as new accepted manuscripts that are relevant for this application after it has been submitted and before the review committee meeting?
Unfortunately, no. Those are called post-submission materials, and NIH has very specific policies around those. However, because this new innovator competition and review is so complicated, there's so many of them, there's just no way that that would be possible. So we do not allow those post-submission materials unless, and this would be something like, there's a delay or there's because of, a hurricane or a fire or an earthquake or something like that. And those notices would be published in the NIH guide. If that's the case, you can refer to those. But unfortunately, no, if you have a new paper accepted, we cannot include that.
All right. Is it okay to contact previous new innovator reviewers to review my grant application prior to submission?
I wouldn't do it. I think that you can ask experts or non-experts to review your application at your will, but I think asking somebody because they were a previous reviewer is really not done. So I would not do that. I would stick to people in your institution or mentors or people in the field, perhaps, that you know. I wouldn't contact a reviewer out of the blue. No.
Are reapplicants given different consideration than first-time applicants?
No, because every application, if you put in a re-applicant, there's no such thing, right? It's a new application each time. You're starting from scratch. So if you submitted last year and maybe you were not discussed, or maybe you had a score, but it was not selective for funding, you can apply again this year, but it's a brand new application. Your old application, the reviews, the scores, all that do not carry along with this new one. So the reviewers won't know about it, and they won't give you any different review than if it was the first time. Brand new start.
All right. Is a finalist, non-finalist equivalent to being discussed versus non-discussed? And do you receive the same level of, is the level of feedback the same?
Okay, a finalist is one that was discussed. Yes, I think that's what you said. And if you're not discussed, you're not a finalist. You get a little bit different level of feedback. If your application is discussed, you get what's called a resume and summary of the discussion, which is written by the SRO, the Scientific Review Officer, and it captures the essence of what went on in that discussion. So reviewers, you will still get their notes and their detailed critiques, but on top of that, you get, they will say something like maybe the committee was divided. Some people thought that this was an issue, but others didn't care and they thought it was fine. And they came down, your score might have ended in between, but that the committee was not divided. Sometimes there'll be a discussion and then the committee agrees. So that gestalt will be captured in that summary of the discussion. And you don't get that if it's not discussed.
Okay. Will we know before the next submission deadline if our proposal was funded?
I can answer that and say 98%, maybe 99% yes. The way we do these, the funding decisions are made at the end of the year, such that sometimes, not very often, we have applications that are made into awards after the August 19th due date. It has been the case almost every year that I have one or two individuals that have to submit a new DP2 application. And then at the last minute, I'm able to, we have extra funds or somebody comes in or whatever, someone can't accept an award, I don't know, whatever, that we're able to fund one more. And so sometimes I have to contact that person and say, can you please withdraw your new DP2 application because you're going to get the old one. And they're annoyed with me for about 3.5 seconds, sometimes a little more, but on average 3.5 seconds, because then they realize they're getting the grant. It's okay. So yeah, that's a tough one, but it happens.
All right. During the review process, if I get a tenure track position or better, is there a way to update my application with such information?
No, that's post-submission materials that we covered before. So no, unfortunately not.
All right. This is kind of a roundabout question. So do the initial reviewer comments get reviewed by anyone on your team? I ask because, for example, we aren't expected to have pilot data, yet seeing reviewer comments that say there are no pilot data and other comments that make me wonder if the reviewer may not understand the nuances of this grant type. How do you ensure the initial reviewers understand why this application may be different from a traditional R01?
Yeah, that's a tough one. You're right. So the the SRO, the scientific review officer at the Center for Scientific Review, they go through and they might lightly edit those critiques for content to make sure they make sense, etc. However, they're not going to edit out something where a reviewer says, but there are no preliminary data here and I want to see it. I will remind you that even though we say you don't need to submit it, you can. And reviewers are human. And if they think that there is something that they absolutely don't believe you'll ever be able to do without, I'm just going to say, without an antibody, and you say you have an antibody but don't show it, maybe that's a bad example, but there are key pieces of preliminary data that they might want to see. And without them, they're not going to believe that you can mitigate the risk of the application. So no, no one's going to go in and edit that out. So to the training aspect, though, reviewers are trained. They're given the funding opportunity, same as you, to read. And, I didn't say it at the beginning, but one of the best pieces of advice is to read the funding opportunity, right? So those reviewers, they undertake not just taking a look at the funding opportunity in their own time, but they are trained by those SROs and they go through, I don't know, like a similar slide webinar sort of talk as to what we did here today, where they're informed that experimental, preliminary data are not required. They're informed that the investigator is the most important thing. But you're right, sometimes they're human. And I have seen reviews come back that say there's no letters of support. Letters of support aren't allowed. So it's very frustrating. And I'm sorry that happens, but no, those things are not edited out. What you need to do is take away from that, this piece of pilot data that you asked about is really crucial. And I shouldn't come back in with this DP2 unless I have something that shows that I can get that part of the project working. Yeah.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, your application will be reviewed by the 3 science area experts. So you'll have those 3 sets of eyes on it and to evaluate it. And then if you make it as a finalist, you have an additional 3 set of eyes, different eyes, to also look through it. So even if there is one critique that maybe they're missing something, hopefully those other reviewers are able to see through that.
Yeah, the only time where that doesn't play in though is if you're not discussed, because those 3 reviewers do not align their reviews to each other and they're never compared. They're never in a room where they talk about it. So it's really independent. So someone can have a thought like that, put it down in your critique, and it will be there. Yep.
All right. So that was the last of the questions that we received. But if you have further questions, please email us at newinnovatorowards@mail.nih.gov. We'll be happy to respond to them. And please, once again, as Trish mentioned, you can make appointments to talk through things with us. Also go to our website, commonfund.nih.gov/newinnovator. We have a lot of resources. This webinar recording and the slides will be posted on the website. And once again, you're welcome to email us with additional questions.
Yes, good luck. We look forward to seeing your applications come in.
All right. Thank you.